Hello and welcome to our weekly share on the Parsha. We are heading, of course, between Pesach and Shavuos. So what I'm going to try and do is to amalgamate two elements, which is the Parsha and Megillus Rus, with the weeks that we have between the two great festivals. I should also apologize. I did promise you that I would try my best to give you a share as we move towards. I'm just trying to get the lighting right. I think we can make this a bit brighter. Yeah, oh, that's better. I did promise you I would try to give you a share with lots of interesting daily Torah for the Seder night. I'm afraid getting busy to go away for Pesach robbed me of that opportunity, so I do apologize. So this has been quite a while since we've had our share. Anyway, we always start with dedications. Dedications for Refuah Shalemas to Eliyahu Eliezer ben Yehuda Yoina. That's my son who's recovering from surgery. Avram Borach ben Sora, who's recovering from surgery. He's very close to me, that young man. Rafal Chai ben Sora, somebody else is very close to me. Oria Chaim ben Chana Yehudis, the gorgeous little boy who's waiting for a lung transplant. Chesko Yehuda ben Yenta. And all of them we wish, of course, very sincerely to have a refuah shalema. So if I move this across there, is that going to be better? Ooh, trying to get the picture right. Yeah, I think that's better. So I've just moved there. I'm not sure. Yes, I think that's better. Yes, that's my favorite angle with my soaring in the background. Something along those lines. Hold on. Yeah, something going wrong tonight. Doesn't matter. Okay, so this week's Parsha is the Parsha of Tazria. And we've got quite a lot to say about Parshas Tazria. The first thing Parshas Tazria is I reach for my reliable art scroll little chumash here. Parshas Tazria, if you have that one, you will find it, of course, on page 608. And Parshas Tazria is after Parshas Shmini. So somebody called the Bear Yosef, or Yosef Salant, he's just over there, I don't think you can see it on the screen. Yosef Salant, he says a very interesting thing, or he asks a very interesting question. What is the juxtaposition of the Parsha Shmini, which, of course, as you will recall, goes through all of the animals that the Torah says is kosher or is not kosher, are kosher or are not kosher. And why, after that, do we come to Parshas Tazria? Parshas Tazria talks about what happens if a woman has a baby boy and if she has a baby girl. Now, if she's baby boy, she is Tommy. Interesting word, Tommy. I'll come back to that in a second. It's usually terribly translated as impure. So we'll see that's problematic in a second. But she is in that state of tuma for 7 days. And then there's a 33-day period in which she finishes the whole tahara, rectification, might we call it, process. And then she brings a sacrifice, turtle dove, etc., to the Beis Hamikdash, and then normal life resumes as possible, the same as possible at the time of the Beis Hamikdash. If it's a baby girl, then it's double that time. It is 14 days when she is Tommy, a Tommy like Anita, and then it's exactly twice the amount of time. So therefore, we're talking about from 7 and 33 being 40 days to 14 and 66 days, making 80 days before she can bring that sacrifice and return to a state of normality. At first glance, it might look as though that Judaism has more negative view when it comes to the birth of a baby girl than a baby boy. But if you've been with me in my sharing before, you will know that's precisely the wrong way to look at it. In fact, the wonderful Hasidic sefer, the Shem Mishmuel, he quotes the Kotzker Rebbe, the great Kotzker Rebbe, who asks an intriguing and interesting question. And if you know the facts that underlie the question, then you would probably come to the same question yourself. And that is, in Jewish thought and in Kabbalistic thought, there is nothing more pure than a Jewish soul entering the world, which of course occurs with every birth. Not only that, the Kabbalistic texts say that the ultimate midwife who delivers and guarantees the safe delivery of every baby is no less than Hashem himself. Hashem, the Shekhinah, is present at every birth. So the ultimate midwife is Hashem. Now, if that's the case, then if what's coming into the world is the purest thing you could possibly have, a soul, if it's Hashem himself, his presence is there when a baby is delivered, where is the room for any tumah, any negative spiritual status? And the answer, said the Kotzker Rebbe, very interestingly, he says it's because of what comes achar kach, after that. What comes after that? Well, it's like in science. If you remember in science, if you take a jar, remember, nature abhors a vacuum. Take a glass jar, turn it upside down, burn a flame inside it. That uses up all the oxygen, all the air. Then you put a stopper on it, a lid on the jar. You have a vacuum. You've created a vacuum. Take away the lid, the vacuum is then air rushes in to fill the vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. Everything, says Rabbi Yerucham of Mir, which is in the physical world, is a parallel of something in the spiritual world. It exists in the physical world to give us an understanding of the real phenomenon, or the real phenomena, which exists in the spiritual realm. It gives us a handle on it. And that is to say, when that container, not a glass jar, but a woman's womb, contains the purest thing that there could possibly be, a baby, a human soul coming into the world, once that soul, that womb, that container is vacated as the baby enters the world and leaves it behind, the negative forces rush in to fill the place that was filled with the greatest spiritual forces just a few seconds before. To get rid of those negative spiritual forces, in the case of a boy, it takes in all 40 days. In the case of a girl, it takes 80 days, twice as much. And the reason it takes twice as much effort to get rid of those negative forces is because twice as much negative forces go in to occupy the space that was containing twice as much spiritual forces before. There's twice as much kedusha with the birth of a girl than there is with a boy. Girls are precisely twice on a higher level, twice times the spiritual level of a boy. But having said that, we still have got to answer the question, why is it juxtaposed to the animals, the ones that are kosher, the ones that are not, which are elaborated on and listed in the previous parsha. So the Ber Yosef, Salant, says a very interesting thing. All of the animals listed in the previous parsha, the rabbit and the obviously the pig, etc., which are not kosher, are always not kosher. Animals which are kosher, the sheep, the cow, etc., are always kosher. Now, they may become a treifa. A treifa is the animal has some physical illness or wound which is going to leave them dead by natural causes after a maximum of 12 months. That's called a treifa. People get the word mixed up. A pig is not a treifa animal. A pig is a non-kosher animal. Never was kosher. Treifa is something that was kosher, which became non-kosher. These are fixed. One is always kosher, like a cow or a sheep. One is always not kosher, like a rabbit or a pig. They never change. But the next parsha tells you, but when it comes to human beings, we are in a state of flux. We do change, sometimes to a state of tuma, spiritual negativity, 40 days for a boy, 80 days for a girl, sometimes in a spiritual up. Jewish people, human beings, all people, have the ability to go up and to go down. We're in a state of, well, it's almost like watching an oscilloscope with the wiggly line going up and down. That's how we are, going up and going down. That's the juxtaposition. Let's keep to that idea for a second, going up and going down. And if we move to Megillas Esther, then at the very beginning of Megillas Esther, it tells us about the stars of the show, if to use a very inappropriate phrase, but the heroes or the main characters, or some of the main characters of the story of Ruth, Megillas Ruth. Obviously Ruth herself, but it says Vahibi Mishrat Shaftim at the beginning, was in the days when the judges judged. Vahira of Boris was a famine in the land, and a man and his wife, and we all know this, and their two children, the two sons, go and leave the land of Israel and go to the land of Moab, which is modern day Transjordan or Jordan. The second pasuk, it tells her the names. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Nomi, and the name of his two sons were Machlon and Chilion. And then, of course, if I invite you to think of the other main characters in the story, then you will, of course, think, well, we've just had Ruth. Well, she's not appeared yet, but she comes just a pasuk or two later. We have, starting at the very beginning, Avimelech, Ruth, Machlon, Chilion. Sorry, Avimelech, Nomi, his wife, Machlon and Chilion, their two sons. Then they marry, and they marry Ruth, Orpah. And then after that, we've got Boaz, who's going to eventually marry Ruth. And then we have the man who was next in line to marry Ruth, who's referred to as Pliny Almoini. So those are the main characters in the story. And here is an interesting concept. The problem is their names. I don't know if you can see this. I made a little list of them here. So Ruth, if I can just point to this, Ruth at the top there, that's the names of the people we were dedicating the share for and Dabar Shlema Ruth, and then Abimelech, Machlon, Chilion, Boaz, and then Pliny Almoni. And this is tremendously intriguing. It's tremendously intriguing because the common denominator in all those names is that almost every single one of them is not their real name. It's not the real name. Let's go through the list. We'll start with Ruth. It's chronologically not correct, but the Megillah is called Ruth, so maybe it is chronologically correct. Ruth, Rashi says, if you take the numerical value of her name, which is Reish, Vov, Sof, so Tov in Hebrew, the numerical value is 400, Reish, numerical value is 200, well, that's 600, and then Vov is 606. And then, as we know, the 613 mitzvahs. So if you subtract 606 from 613, then that's 7. So her name equals 606. 606, because that's the number of mitzvahs she accepted upon herself when she becomes a Jew. And the 7 mitzvahs, it's not 613, because he's already obliged as a non-Jewish person to keep the 7 Noachite commandments. So therefore, she's only taking on 606. And therefore, her name indicates the fact that she is a convert. And of course, it is, to put it mildly, expected that a convert will take on a new Jewish name. And there's Ben Bagbag and Ben Hehe at the end of the 5th period of Pirkei Avos. Onkelos, the name Onkelos will certainly give you a hint that he was of Roman stock. Ben Bagbag and Ben Hehe is very interesting. Bagbag, it hints the fact that they were Gerim, because base Gimel Bag is 5, Bagbag, 5. Chum Shitar, the 5 books of the Chumash of the Torah. Ben Hehe, same story. Of course, as a person who isn't Jewish, who becomes Jewish, will take on a Jewish name. So Ruth is the name she seems to have. But it seems to me that we're talking about the name that she had after she completes her Geras, when she takes on 606 mitzvahs, in addition to the 7 she already had. What was her original name? I must admit, if I was being really professional, I should have done that research beforehand. Maybe I'll have that information for you next week. But the hint clearly is there that that's not her real name. Let's move forward. Elimelech. Elimelech, the rabbis say, means Olai Malchus. To me, it is appropriate and will come royalty. And of course, through his line, the Jewish kings, or David and Melech's household, I should say, is going to be born. So is that a name that indicated his story, or a name which indicates that that's who his original name was? I'm not sure in him. Well, I'll leave that one as a question mark. How about Nomi? The Nomi, as you probably know, Rashi says, she was called Nomi because everybody called her Nomi. And Nomi means pleasant. So her name was Nomi. So that means to say her name was Nomi because everybody called her Nomi. Well, of course they would have called her Nomi if that was her name. Why is it going to call her Margaret? If it says everybody called her Naomi, then that was the name that people gave her. Well, what was her original name? By definition, if it's the name she gets after she's here in the world, it wasn't the name she was given when she came into the world. We'll try and find out for next week what her original Hebrew name is. Right? If this theory of mine, I should emphasize the theory of mine, so it might be totally wrong, except the next two, her sons, Machal and Chilion, that's a definite. It's in the Gemara and Baba Basra. And the Gemara debates whether or not it was the real names or not, because let's go with the idea it's not their real names for a very obvious reason. Machlon, the oldest son, Machlon says the Al Shach HaKodesh is the root of the name is from the word Machila, to be forgiven. Chilion, Kof Lamed, Yud Vav Nun, comes from the word Kalia, which means to be destroyed. And the obvious problem of that being their real name, their original name, is nobody ever calls their child destroyed. A name that means destroyed or exterminate. Jews are extremely nervous about Ayin Horrors and all that sort of thing. And you never, I mean, I heard you had a baby boy. Yes. Have you had the breeze? Yeah. What did you call him? Exterminate. No, nobody's going to call the child exterminate. So the Alshach says that Machal B'Chilion were in actual fact descriptions of their life or their story. So that the same way that Naomi's name is her story, maybe Elimelech as well, his story through his actions and his family, eventually the royal household of King David is going to be founded. Ruth is not a name, it's her story. But the problem is, one means, Machla means Mechila, to be forgiven. Chili means to be wiped out. Why should one brother be forgiven for what he did wrong and one wiped out if they both did the same thing? Now, what did they do that was wrong? Well, there's two possibilities. One, that they stayed outside the land of Israel after their father's demise, when they could have returned to the land of Israel, or they married out. Machlon marries Ruth, and Chilion marries Orpah. But the problem with that, obviously, is they both did the same thing. Machlon marries Ruth, Moabite princess, and Chilion marries Orpah, Moabite princess. So if that's what's wrong, they both did the same wrong. They both stayed outside the land of Israel when they could have got returned. It's not fair. Why should one get forgiven and one be wiped out? I'll explain to you in a second how Machlon was forgiven. But the answer to this you'll find in Pasuk Dalet. V'yizalhem noshim avias, and they married Moabite wives. Shema Achas was Orpah. The name of the first one was Orpah. Shema Shenis, the name of the second one was Ruth. So the Alshach, in his laser accurate way, points to the fact that it should have just said their names were Orpah Ruth. When I say the name of the first one was Orpah, the name of the second was Ruth. If they say Orpah and Ruth, then I know Orpah was the first one and Ruth was the second one. Why does I have to say 1 and 2? And he answers that it's telling you who was first. Let's stick with the fact they married out. If Machlon was the oldest, and he was, because in Pasuk base it says the name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, the name of his two sons, Machlon and Chilion. Machlon was the first son. But who married out first? The second son, the youngest son. The youngest son married first. The name of Achaz was Orpah. That means that the youngest son, Chilion, married out first. Machlon followed in his footsteps. You're not as guilty in the eyes of the Torah, in the eyes of Hashem, if somebody weakens your resolve to resist a thing which is something you shouldn't do. The person who broke through the barriers and the limitations and the prohibitions of Judaism first, encouraging and making it easier for other people to do it, they bear a much, much stronger responsibility, a much greater level of guilt. Therefore, Machlon gets forgiven, but Chilion doesn't. How is Machlon forgiven? Well, at the end of the story, when Boaz, we'll come to Boaz in a second, when Boaz is an extension of his life by one whole day and is able to marry Ruth, they have one married night together, they conceive a child together, he dies the next day. But when Ruth gives birth to that child in the last posuk in the Megillah, it says, and the name of the boy was called Oved. Who was Oved? Oved was not just Ruth's son, but Ruth's dead husband. Machlon was reincarnated into the body of the child that Ruth gave birth to. So he was forgiven. He was able to come back and to continue his journey and to repair the damage he did when he was there the first time. Machlon Bechilian. So therefore, Machlon Bechilian, according to the Alshach, clearly going with the opinion of the Gemara, that wasn't their real names. And I'd say it's very hard to understand that they could be their real names, who would call the child exterminate. Then that would be clear to see that again, it's not their names, it's their story, not who they were, but what they did. Machlon Bechilian. Boaz, as far as I know, that was his real name. I find no evidence that was not. But the person, and of course he marries Ruth, as we said before, but the person who should have married Ruth was somebody called Ploni Almoni. Ploni Almoni is the way that the Talmud describes somebody. We would say probably thingamy or thingamajig, right? It doesn't give him his name. His real name was Tov, but it doesn't call him Tov. And it changes. And quite clearly, it changes his name there. It's not his real name either. What is this phenomenon all about? What is this phenomenon all about? And the answer is contained in the introduction to the Parsha I mentioned before, Tazria. And the juxtaposition, according to the Be'er Yosef, between Shmini, the animals which are fixed as kosher and non-kosher, and human beings, they're going up and down. You see, if you enter this world and you have a certain name, then that's fine. But really, in a sense, you want your name to change a little bit. Somebody called Yisrael Meir Kagan. He was called the Chofetz Chaim. Now, of course, that wasn't his name, but because of who and what he became, he got a different name attached to it. I'll tell you a story, and I'm not in any way comparing myself to the Chofetz Chaim, but when I used to be the campus rabbi for the 14 universities of the northwest of England, every year there was the National Student Conference, Jewish Student Conference, in Derbyshire in England. It used to be, it's called the Hayes, just popped into my mind, the Hayes Conference Centre in Derbyshire. And I was speaking there, and once I was walking towards the lecture theatre when the previous lecture had finished, and the crowds were emptying out. And a couple of the students come rushing up and said, "Oh, the previous speaker, an Israeli, was speaking about you in his shir." And I said, in his lecture, and I said, "Really, I've never met him. What was he saying about me?" He said he noticed on the schedule that there's a speaker there called Rabbi YY. And he said, "What a great name for a rabbi, YY." He said, because that's what a rabbi should be about. Somebody you can speak to and say, why this, why that, why the other thing, and get an answer, which I thought was quite sweet. And for most of my life, people have called me Rabbi YY or even YY, and I don't care because I think that's a nice name for a rabbi or any Jew to be called. That means that you can. In fact, I was once debating at Manchester University on the subject of euthanasia, and posters all around the university, "Come in here, Rabbi YY, WHY, WHY." They seem to think that YY was a title, a YY, and maybe it should be. It would be a very nice thing. I'd be really quite pleased if, as it were, I lived up to my name, or rather my nickname. My real name's Yehuda Yoina. I'm very proud of that as well. But wouldn't it be nice if you go upstairs and people say, "Wow, he was a YY"? That would be a good thing to do. Nomi. Let's assume her name was Sora Rivka. I don't know. But people called her Nomi. You see, if you're the same person at 20 as you were at 10, you're just an older 10-year-old. That's quite a condemnation. If you're the same person at 30 as you were when you're a 20-year-old, that's also quite a condemnation. You should be growing and you should be evolving and changing. And a new name, as it were, which defines you as a different person, a better person, that's a good indication. It says in Pirkei Avos, if you want to know, because we're all scared what's going to happen when we go upstairs and we're standing in front of the Beis Din Shel Ma'ala, but it says in Pirkei Avos as a formula that might alleviate your worries. that if you've got a good name down here, if you are considered warmly and in admiration by the rest of the Jewish people, that is going to tell you how you're viewed in heaven. If the Jewish people see a person who's so refined and so special that they call her Nomi because the Jewish people see her, that probably gives you a hint as to how she's seen in Shemaim as well. And I'll be very pleased if in my books and in my sharing, I hope I've done a good job. And that as far as Shemaim's concerned, that I'm living up to my nickname. It's not really my nickname, it's my initials, but that's how I'm generally known as a YY. That's a good thing to be known as. More than that, and that is that the name that you're given is who and what you are. The Gemara above him says Rabbi Meir Medayat Bishma. Rabbi Meir used to analyze people's names to know what their situation, their reality is. And that's to say their personality is. Because you are your name. The name that you are given or you choose for your child is ultimately put into your mind, Min Shamayim. Because the name, if you know how to look at the name and analyze the name, like Machla and Bechilian, then that is going to tell you exactly the ingredients that go to make up that soul. And therefore, that will tell you what the potential of that soul is. So if you are your name, but you've, as it were, fulfilled that name in a positive direction, because there's a problem. If you're given a certain name, Avram Yitzchak ben Yehuda, then if you're Avram Yitzchak ben Yehuda, and I know you and I can say about this Avram Yitzchak ben Yehuda, he is a kind person, he's a gentle person, maybe he's a little bit, because nobody's perfect, maybe he's got a little bit of a temper, but generally he's a fabulous person. But there's another Avram Yitzchak ben Yehuda who lives in wherever you like, some other place, who's selfish and horrible. And if you are your name, now how come they both have the same name and different personalities? And the answer is it's a bit like defining water. Excuse me, I'm just going to sneeze, I think. Excuse me. We describe water as water, W-A-T-E-R, if we speak English. If you speak Spanish or Italian, I think we call it aqua. If you speak Russian, you call it vada. In German, it's called Wasser. In French, it's called l'eau, and the list goes on and on and on. But that's just a name. But what it is H2O. And sometimes, as I did today in the classroom, if I write that on the board, water and then H2O, I say, what have you written? Say what some people say, but everybody said, water twice. No, that's not true. Water is what we call it. H2O is what it is. A Hebrew name is what you are. That's your potential. How is it that one guy with the same name is totally different? Because you see, you can have flour, water and eggs and sugar, and you can make bread, or you can make cake. Bread, the fundamental, the basic thing to eat, or something a little bit more special. It depends what you do with it. One took their potential and made something special of themselves. Became a nomi. The basic ingredients defined by the name, they turned it into a nomi. The other one, maybe into something else. And here's a little idea of mine. I always think we should always strive to be odd. In our lives, you should strive to be odd. I don't mean odd, ODD, I mean HD. That's to say that a person has to be honored and defined, odd. And you should be honored and defined in such a way that it's positive. And that should be that people, good people, people that you admire, think that you are honorable. If those who are honorable define you that way, then that's great. People, if you're admired by bad people, if they honor you and they define you as being honorable and you're a bad person, not so good. And it's not such a good thing. In other words, through life, we should be evolving. We should be changing. If you don't change, that's a little bit like Parshas Tazria. You're a bit like an animal, not changing. But a human being, Parshas Tazria, again, ups and downs. But if the graph is hopefully going in a positive direction, then you're honored and distinguished. Be odd, honored and distinguished. And you're honored and you're distinguished if you keep going up, you change. To be honored and distinguished by that other people think you are worthy of honor and distinction, that's what you should be aiming for. But that comes about when you change, when you are defined by different criteria or different language, different names than the ordinary name of your start name, because your start name, evolved into something else. But that's the process. People have ups and people have downs. So let's change this up and move to chapter 2, and this will be our final point. Now, Ruth, of course, is more than an extremely special person. But it's a journey, ups and downs. Here's a very interesting observation of the Alshach, and I'll leave you with this thought. When Ruth totally embraces Judaism, totally embraces her conversion, and Naomi and her come back to the land of Israel, the land of Yehuda in Israel, then, of course, the famous thing, they don't have any food. And so it says that in Pasuk Beis, V'tomer Ruth Samavia el Naomi. And Ruth, the Moabite woman, says to Naomi, Alech l'no hasadi, I will go out to the field, and I will gather the corn or the grains. It's actually the corn is barley. First harvest is barley. I'll gather the bits of barley that are dropped by the harvesters, which of course the Torah allows you to do. Acher, asher imzachem beinov, v'tomer lo lechi biti. And then the next post, and I will go after the harvesters. Now, the problem with this is, as you probably know, that the Mishnah in Bava Metzia and in Gimel says there are two people you mustn't remind them of their backgrounds, of their origins. One is a convert and the other is a Baal Tshuva. Now, if that's the case, why is it called her Hamoavia, Posset base, chapter base? But Tamar Ruth Hamavia, and Ruth the Moabitess. Ruth the Moabitess? No, she's not. She's converted to become a Jew. And you're not allowed to remind somebody that they're Jew. And yet the Megillah does. El Nomi, Alechna no hasadi, Malakna Meshwalim, and I'll gather the barley that's been dropped, Achar, Asher Emsachim Enof, behind the person that I find favor in his eyes. Right. So if the owner of the field allows me to go after the cow stream, that's fine. To which Nomi says to her, Vatoma lo lechi biti. Go, my daughter. Lechi biti. But, so she's saying something else there. As we said before, it's a process. And the reason we read Ruth at Shavuos is because we're in a process from Passover to Shavuos. The Jewish people are going up. We will slip up. But just because you fail doesn't make you a failure. You're only a failure if you give up. And of course, when you do make mistakes, you're going to have to correct them. And the teacher is going to point out to you that you should correct them. So what did she say to her? She said, Ruth said, I will go acher a kotzrim. I'll go after the person I find favor in his eyes. And then after that, she says, I'll go acheri. The word acher and acheri. Now, she used the word acher. If she says I should go after someone, acher, it tends to suggest close proximity. But acheri doesn't suggest close proximity. Achri can mean far off. It's almost the same word. It's the same word. And it can mean close proximity, but it really means far away. What she was really saying is, I'll go to the field, but I'll keep away from those men, but it doesn't look good. To say it that way, she'll go after someone, sounds as though, well, that's a bit like a Moabite girl. And Ruth says, and Naomi says to Ruth, when she hears her use that word acher, which is ambiguous, then she says to her, you know what? Go as my daughter. Be my daughter. Act like my daughter. My daughter wouldn't say the word acher. That's ambiguous. You've got to grow. You've got to change. You've got to embrace this new status of Ruth. And that was a slip up, no problem. Next pasuk, she goes achri. She's got the message. Because being a Jew is certainly always to be in an upward trajectory. Sometimes you slip up. But as long as the general trajectory is up, fine. The failures don't matter. In fact, the failures are extremely good teachers. Just because you failed doesn't make you a failure. So the journey of a Jew is essentially one, of course, the whole story of Ruth is the microcosm of the Jewish people, and our going up again where names are changed. When the Jewish people are going to be the Am HaKodesh, and then a people will become a holy people. A Yaakov will become a Yisrael. That each new name is an indication that somebody's not just stuck. The things that are stuck are the not kosher things. The things that change, those are human beings, at least human beings who have ambition to grow and become different. Different names, different people. I shall look forward to speaking to you again next Shabbos. Have a very, very good Shabbos or a Shabbat Shalom.